Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January Bristol Schools Forum. Hope you're all well. We've got a number of different items on the agenda today, and I'll take us through those in a second. We've also got a few people who are standing in for others, so hopefully we'll be able to support you with engaging with the forum this evening. If any of you have got any questions, then please do raise your hands at different points throughout the agenda. Okay, so if everyone's happy, got a copy of the papers, then I'll get started on item 2. So Sam, if you're able to just give us a brief update in relation to forum standing business, please.
Sure. Item number A, we've got apologies for absence. We have so far had apologies from Richard Pensker, Rebecca Watkin, Tracy Jones, who will join later if able, and Steve Mills, who's been substituted by Tom Merchant. B, confirmation that the meeting is correct. I can confirm the meeting is correct. C, appointment of new members' resignations. The Diocese of Clifton Department for Schools and Colleges rep will now be Joe Kingston. Mary Cox attended the last meeting and has passed the mantle over to Joe. And Emma Richard, this is Emma Richard's last meeting, and Tonya Hill, head teacher of New Fossway School, is going to take over as representative of Special Maintained. It's still hoped that we will be able to hold a training session in the spring. Notifications of vacancy, there remains one vacancy for secondary governor for a new and an advert needs to go out for that.
Okay, thank you, Sam. That's really helpful. Thank you for going through that. I can't see that Emma's with us yet, so we'll pass on thanks to her when she's able to join us. Is she able to join us this evening, Sam?
She was planning to join us this evening. It was too short notice for the new representative, so she was planning to join, I believe.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, that then takes us on to the minutes. And so we had our last meeting, it was in November, and we had some healthy conversation at the City Council offices. So thank you all for your attending and contribution to that. So in terms of the minutes themselves, is there any, rather than going through page by page, is there anything specifically in terms of accuracy that anyone would like to highlight? Nope, I can't see anything there. Now, we don't have any actions from the minutes. However, I know at the final point where we talked about delegation, I know there were members of the primary aspect of delegation who are keen to see some financial information around some of the delegation elements. So if we could carry that forward, please, Sam, and add that to this section of minutes, and then we can make sure that we're following up on those two specifically. Okay. Any other items in relation to actions from the last meeting you want to highlight? Okay. Right, well, I'll move us in then to the next item, which is an update from Richard. So over to you, please, Richard.
Thanks, Sarah. Evening, everybody. So I've just got some key updates I thought I'd share with you today. So the first one is around family hubs. I know some members have asked about where we are with that piece of work. So we will be progressing with the Family Hub and Start for Life programme. That's jointly overseen by Health and Social Care and Education. So we're one of 75 local authorities that are eligible to receive a share of at 301 million for 22 to 2025. So we should receive a grant between 4.5 and 4.8 million to fund the new Family Hubs and Start for Life programme, but we're still waiting for that amount to be determined. So the idea around this work is to join up and enhance services delivered through the family hubs, and that access to support for parents and carers is at the, a timely and in the right place, the right time. In terms of the services that were brought together, so it will be families, professionals, services and providers operating and connecting together to provide those services. The Family Hub will be the front door to the universal and early help for families from conception to 19 or up to 25 for those with special educational needs, disabilities. So the model is, like I said, a multi-agency partnership approach as well. and there will be physical hubs, but then there will be networks and a digital offer alongside that. So Bristol submitted its delivery plan at the end of December, and we're still waiting to hear if this plan has been accepted. But the plan in brief sort of outlines how we're going to use the funding to do the transformation phase of the implementation of the hubs. They will be the main delivery tool for the Hubs and Start for Life programme. We will be delivering in areas of early language and home learning, parenting support, perinatal mental health, and infant feeding support. Those are the key areas that we've identified there. The content of the programme is quite prescriptive. We do have to meet the government's key guidelines there, and specific detail for Bristol's content and ambitions have been developed as a locality partnership and response to local needs. So that we're still waiting the outcome really of our application. But the idea around this will be that obviously early help and join up between services will impact positively on parents, carers, families, and ultimately the progress and well-being of our children and young people. The following area I wanted to pick up was around the DSG management plan. As you know, I came to Schools Forum back in September to talk about an engagement programme, linked it to some of the proposed mitigations proposals that we wanted to look at related to the DSG management plan. That piece of work has now concluded. So the engagement process finished on at the beginning of 11th of November actually, and that was an online survey alongside face-to-face via Teams mostly meetings with key stakeholder groups. We had 32 surveys returned and some detailed responses as well from other representatives via email. So there was overall agreement with the proposed areas. People were happy that those mitigation areas are areas that we should consider. And looking at some of the other areas that they would like us to consider whilst we're looking at those proposals included the work around specialist places and resource spaces, that is continued, but also that it includes opportunities for post-16. And the range of needs that are catered for through the Specialist Places programme. They would like for us to consider how there can be further improvements to the HCP assessment process, and how to note that the element 1 and 2 funding in schools is under pressure with the needs of children and young people increasingly becoming more complex. The inconsistency of inclusive practice across schools was another area that they wanted us to consider as part of the work that we do, and how health is involved in the HCP process. A key one is around improving parental confidence in the inclusive practice of schools, which I think also came out through our local area inspection. So I think that ties together quite well. Systems and processes should be seamless. So if we're looking at systems and processes around SEND, that we should be looking to make sure that they are that they work across all phases from 0 to 25, and to ensure that there's co-production around shaping services for pupils with SEND and their families. So those are some key points. That's not an exhaustive list, but all of the information is currently with the consultation team within the council, who will produce a more detailed report later, and I will obviously share that when it is ready. So overall, the engagement process is supporting us with our next steps in developing that. Another area I wanted to talk about was maintain nursery schools. So work is continuing with the nursery schools to review their financial position and identify sustainable operating models for the future. The funding that Schools Forum agreed from the underspend in 21-22 is being used to provide additional finance support, as well as provide nursery leaders with strategic support to develop their plans and implement them. The recent announcement in the DSG around maintain nursery school supplement, the increase to that is very welcome. So modelling based on January 2022 numbers, it looks like currently we receive 645,000 for the maintain nursery school supplement, plus 292,000 for the teachers' pay and pension grant, but which is a total of 137,000. The new rate that is proposed for the supplement for Bristol of £3.80 per hour, based on those 2022 numbers, would give us 2.5 million. So that's an increase of 1.5 million for maintained nursery schools next year. So that increasing funding, alongside the work that we're doing to reorganise nursery provision so it's sustainable, will begin to impact positively on the financial position of nursery schools through next year. It's still important that we continue the transformation work, because we need to ensure resilience, and we also need to continue that focus on reducing those in-year deficits. We want the nursery schools to be in a position to respond to future financial pressures such as pandemic, cost of living, etc. So we really do need to continue the transformation work alongside the fact that they are receiving additional funding through the supplement. And we're currently supporting those nursery schools with their budget submissions for 23-24. And then finally, an area that has been raised several times in the early years task and finish group, and just wanted to give you just the headlines on this, was around recruitment and retention. So it's becoming more challenging in the early years sector. The sufficiency of places is not being affected yet, but the impact is starting to be felt. So we've had a number of settings close since 2019. We've lost 9 early years providers since 2019, and we've lost nearly 20% of our childminders in 2022. So things seem to be becoming more acute. And this is obviously due to the number of vacancies and reductions in applications for jobs that the early year settings are receiving. So really it's around understanding that the financial sustainability of settings and the recruitment of staff is potentially impacting in early years, and will, if it continues, start to impact on our sufficiency of places. We have set up a recruitment and retention forum with representatives from the private and voluntary, independent and maintained sector, and Bristol Council and WECA. So we've got a good group of representative people working on this. There is going to be some work around recruitment campaign. We are looking to raise the status of the early years workforce within Bristol, and develop some materials with DWP job centres and job fairs for wider use with that promotion. And we are hosting and signposting to information on jobs, college apprenticeships, etc. So there's some key work going on to respond to that issue, but obviously it's a work in progress. And I know some elements of this is not necessarily pertinent to Schools Forum, but I think it's the impact on sufficiency of places and the sustainability of settings that I think is key to take from that piece of feedback. So that concludes the areas that I was going to share with you today. Happy to take any questions if anybody's got any.
Thank you, Richard. That was really helpful. I'll open up to questions in a second, but I know we've got Abby, who's our new director, who's just joined the meeting. So Abby, did you want to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, afternoon everyone. Thank you, Sarah. So my name's Abby Bago. So I'm the new Executive Director for Children and Education for the council. So I am the statutory DCS. I look forward to meeting you all as I visit your schools in the coming months, and hopefully we can touch base and have some intros and one-to-ones. Nice to meet everyone.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you too, and thank you very much for joining. Great to have you on board. Okay, so any specific questions or comments to Richard? I think it was really reassuring to know that we are looking at supporting the early years sector with the recruitment and retention group. That sounded like some great work in that space. Any other comments or any other questions that anyone has for Richard? This might be covered in a later section, Richard, but we have paused on the high needs task and finish group, haven't we? You mentioned the early years group had met, but we haven't yet got membership for the high needs task and finish group. Have we considered that if we need to reform that one, or at the moment if we're trying to do that slightly differently?
No, we've identified some internal officers who can attend the high needs task and finish group. But I think in terms of membership from Schools Forum, we still need to do that piece of work in terms of getting the representatives that we need there.
Okay, great. I think for the next meeting, if we just sort of explain exactly what's required from the group, how many times they meet, etc., I think then we can approach forum members with a request for them to support with it.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with Sam to put that request out. That's fine.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you. So I'll move us on then to item 5, which is the budget monitor update for period 8. Angel, could you take us through the key points on the report, please, because it's just for our information at this stage. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. This is the as at end of November, the LA is forecasting where we are in terms of DSG block. The key changes in PH, there is a forecast improvement of circa £1 million. Mainly contributing factors are £500,000 from growth fund. We think we don't probably need to spend a full budget of 2 million, and also £500,000 improvement in the ALP provisions where we had a forecast review recently. So that takes us to the in-year forecast deficit of £18.8 million, which is a reduction of just over £1 million with the key cost drivers I've just mentioned. So as stated in the page 9 of the the meeting pack, so adding into that £24.6 million carry forward deficit. So as at the end of November, the forecast carry forward cumulative deficit is about £43.4 million at the moment. Yeah, unless you've got any questions, and I'll keep it brief.
Okay, thank you, Angel, for the update. It's pleasing that it's gone in the right direction as such. I know there's still a considerable deficit in terms of prediction, but it's helpful to see that's reduced for a couple of different reasons. Has anyone got any comments on that? Okay, I think it's important that we do get these regular updates to understand the scale of the challenges for the high needs block. And all right, there it is a reduction, but nonetheless, we are looking at 43 million deficit for the end of this period for April. So it's important that we receive those. And yes, Angel's very helpful in terms of highlighting some of the key things for us, but we do need to be made aware as forum members of the scale of the challenge at the moment. Move us on then to item 6. So this is the Dedicated Schools grant for next financial year, next academic year.
Sarah, can we just
sorry,
pause?
Chair, Simon Holmes has his hand raised.
Sorry, Simon, my fault. Over to you, please.
Yeah, sorry, no, I was a bit late. I was just absorbing what Richard said and the last thing, and it's a kind of a question that covers both, because I know it's the experience for the nursery schools and also for every other school, a big increase in the number of children presenting with high needs, complex needs, and particularly in the early years sector, that's combined with a difficulty in recruitment for staff to support, especially when you can get paid more in Lidl than you can now in a school. And on top of that, there is the pressure from Ofsted for the quality, which is obviously our priority, to is the quality of provision we get. And Ofsted don't seem to be at all sympathetic or interested in any of the wider issues around it. So I think that's also a real challenge for schools, is how we maintain quality as well as saving costs, and at a time when it's really difficult to recruit. So I think that all has to be borne in mind as well as we go forward, because we're seeing, getting a lot of pressure from all kinds of angles at the same time. That was my question. It's like, how are we going to balance all these things together?
I think that's more of a question for Richard.
Yeah, Richard, what are your thoughts?
I was just trying to unmute myself. Apologies. Yes, I think that, this is another area where the recruitment and retention could potentially be a key risk for us, because the recruitment is often linked to supporting with high needs as well. So again, that piece of work that we're doing around recruitment and retention, critical to support with that. Again, we've got the work that is being funded from the dedelegation that Schools Forum agreed last year around belonging in SEND. We've got that for early years, and that piece of work is also going out now, which is aiming to support settings with meeting those complex needs. But there's no denying that the demand has increased and is continuing to increase in early years, as it is across our primary and secondary phases as well. So it is going to be an ongoing challenge, but what we are looking at is that investment in the funding and training and development around SEND as being a key piece of work to help settings manage and support our youngest children as they come in. But I can't disagree with Simon in terms of the challenge, in terms of the increasing needs and the sort of challenges with recruitment and retention at the same time.
Okay, I think thank you, Richard. Denisa, did you want to come here on this one?
I did. I just think of what may be useful, because I think when we look at it and think about it from a whole systems perspective, the whole range of different competing challenges that we need to bring together. And I'm wondering, Richard, if it'd be useful for Forum to bring back a refreshed overview of the transformation programme, for us to really think about whether or not it's going to be delivering against all of these objectives, and whether the scope of that potentially needs to change. We have got the additional funding, and I think that may help in terms of sustainability, but we may want to take an opportunity to really look at the formula as well, because we do have a SEND element coming within, and we want to obviously ensure that we're fully accounting for high needs in the areas that we need to, fully accounted for early years where we need to, but it may be an opportunity to rethink some of that, but also really looking at how we're also going to tackle the deficit, because the additional funding isn't going to help. That may help us with a sustainable position, but it doesn't give us a strategy for the long-term view in the deficit. But I think if you could bring back to Forum an overview of the scope of the transformation programme, I think that would be really helpful for everyone then to be clear on what we're hoping to deliver and how we're going to tackle all of these multiple challenges. I think that would be helpful, and hopefully that will help in trying to ensure we're addressing all the key points.
Thanks, Denise. I think that's a really good suggestion. It'd be helpful to get an update on that, because I know there's lots of different projects and programs and streams of works that we're exploring at the moment. So a reminder of those and how they're all brought together would be very helpful. Thank you. Abby?
Hi, sorry, it's merely more just a reflection and maybe for a future forum, but we could take some of the learning from the Southeast around some of the kind of push around outward publicity and what we can do with you guys and work alongside you. We're fortunate enough that within the directorate we do have employment and skills, so it's what can we do to support you around pushing the agenda around recruitment and retention, and thinking about how can we do more sector development in this space. So maybe for a later forum, and I'll pick up with Richard and Jane offline as to what we could bring back here as a plan to kind of support all of you, all the schools and the nurseries and settings around this.
I think that would be very welcome. I know it's not necessarily just early years, but there's other sector, primary and secondary, that are also struggling with recruitment. But then I know our sector is not unique. There's lots of other challenges in other fields as well. So a shortage of staffing is definitely a priority in lots of places, I think. But a joined up approach and some new thinking around that, I think, would be very helpful. But any other comments? Is that helpful, Simon?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think the suggestion of like an overview of where we are with it all, because there's just lots of different strands and things, and things change as well as we're going along, and there's sort of the additional supplementary funding plus the high needs block. And I think it's just sort of like an overview, recognizing where we are and what is the strategy going forward, and are we on the right one, and does it need changing or tweaking? Would be really helpful. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I can't see any other hands up. I'll move us on then to item 6. So this is the dedicated schools grant for 23-24. And we're being asked, and I'll hand over to Angel in a second, to note the new funding levels that have been released in relation to the value of the DSG. Approve the final transfer between the schools block and Heine's block. Approve the early years national funding formula rates, which might be an interesting one to discuss in a bit more detail, specifically in relation to the previous conversation, and then provide any feedback in relation to Cabinet and Council for their consideration in making final decisions. So just a reminder to everyone, we are consulted on the rates, but effectively it is a council decision on what rates are then implemented for the coming academic year. So Angel, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair articulated, this paper is invite all of you to note the funding levels and all the schools block formula factors and assumptions we worked through in October subgroup and agreed in principle in November meeting, which we have now put through the APT, and we will share with you later on what the impact of the schools formula and the allocations, etc. And also we need to agree the earliest national funding formula rates and agree the central services block allocations, which is articulated in this paper. So as outlined in table 1, this is the latest DSG allocation, which was announced on the 16th of December 2022. And so Bristol is getting 453 million, just over a little bit, of which you can see the increase from the schools block and, Heine's block, which is quite obvious, increase £8 million. And overall increase is about 7%, but there is a reduction in central services block, which is, as we anticipated, 20%. That's caused by 20% reduction on the historic elements. The Department of Education is planning to push it through, as we already know about it. So there are some notes underneath the table, which please note, which caused a bit of confusion for myself as well. So on the same day, ESFA also announced a mainstream schools additional grant, which is in relation to the 2 billion they set aside for the schools. And what they've done is, so out of the 2 billion, they've set aside let me just check the numbers now. For the schools element, they've set us aside the £2 billion, sorry, out of the £2 billion increase, the 400 million, the Heine's block increase already included within our allocation of 453 million, which is shown in table 1. But the 10.749, the Bristol indicative allocation for schools has not passed on to us yet, and is not included within the 453 million. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry, got stuck a little bit. And then we going through the papers, I've explained briefly that the central services block, there is a reduction. That means some central services funding will be reduced by almost £119,000, which will impact on the future service provision, which we can have a look at the detailed working out what's been impacted on. And yeah, so the Heine's block, so we've also done the forecasts, although there's additional £8 million allocation to Bristol for 23-24, but that is not going to provide any additional funding for historic deficits, neither would it cover current year in year forecast shortfall, which is about £19 million, unfortunately. So if you look at table 2, that's the on page 15, and that's just the Heine's block forecast overspent in 23-24. as you can see. So it's more or less around 18.6 million at the moment, because the mitigation proposals, which we are still currently in draft and working with Newton, the DFE Delivery Better Value for Sand partner, and still work in progress. And until consulted, we have not reflected the benefits of the mitigations, which is around initial shared with you. Initial version in September was around 12 million, so which has not impacted reflected in the forecast yet. And that's the high needs block. Yeah, the other highlights is the 0.5% transfer, £1.6 million from the schools block to the high needs block, which we discussed and agreed in principle with the forum, and hopefully you formally endorse that tonight. And one major change from the November meeting is that DHCRG, the DFE has announced the extension of statutory override for further 3 years. So it was meant to end in March 2023, further 3 years, which means it's going to end in March 2026. And that gives the local authority to work through the mitigations and to continue on our transformation journey and to implement the changes needed to bring DSG to the sustainable footing. Yeah. So schools block calculations will be covered in a different paper. And also, there's the early years allocation, as Richard earlier on indicated slightly about the maintained nursery school supplement funding. The biggest change is that one is the hourly rate has increased to about £3.80 per hour. So that gives, just over £1.5 million to the maintained nursery schools. So that's a good news. And also the 3 to 4 year old hourly rate has increased by 6p, which is equivalent to 1%. And the 2 year old rate increased by 9p, which is equivalent to 1.6%. And this means actually a real term reduction in funding because of the cost of living. So just want to highlight that as well. Point for 4.13 on page 16 is a historic change to the funding formula. So we just left it there to remind everyone. So again, in table 3, we've done the projection of what's DSG block look like in 23-24, which is on page 17 of your pack. And as you can see, the high needs block, carry forward is about £63.1 million showing at the moment, which is offset slightly by schools block underspend, which as at the PA forecast. And also the delegation, but it's ring fenced for specific purposes. Central services block, I've got a note for it. There was £8,000 overspend carry forward from previous years, and I reduced the spend by £8,000 to bring the carry forward in 23-24 to zero. And early years, that's mainly due to the improvement work, which we assigned £90,000 to nursery schools and £250,000 to the early years improvement work back in May, and we've been notified that the funding will be carried forward. So that's offset the SAN overspend about £500,000 a little bit. Yeah, so you're showing the overspend about 213,000 there for early years. So that gave us the overall DSG in-year deficit of around 80 million, similar to current level. So the cumulative deficit looked like here £62 million, just over. Again, just to remind you, the mitigation proposals, the impacts of that financial benefits is not reflected in those forecasts yet, because we have not finished our consultation, still work in progress. I don't know if we want to stop a little bit. So that's just the oversight of the DSG funding allocations at the moment. Is there any questions before the early years national funding formula?
Thanks, Angel. Yeah, I was going to pause there anyway, because I thought that would be a good logical place to just pause and reflect on what we've just heard and seen. So thank you for taking us through that. So overall, I think it sounds like there's good news. There's more funding for schools and more funding for the high needs block, which is, you know, positive. The points that I really noticed from the report is the 1% reduction in pupils. If you have a look at October 2021 to October 2022, which is around 300 and something, I think, which talks back to a previous point about sufficiency, both in early years, but also in primary. So that's one for us to continue to monitor. But despite that reduction, there's still a significant increase in the actual DSG. So I think that was helpful to note, and helpful to note that there is that additional funding coming to schools as well, because there's lots of challenges around costs at the moment. So it's good to see that there has been some response, and it's good to see that we have got some additional funding for the high needs block. However, we know that that is still not yet sufficient for the current expenditure, and as part of the Safety Valve programme at the moment. So has anyone got any comments they'd like to make on the overall DSG or any of the forecast budgets in terms of how they've been presented to us, perhaps table 3 or table 2 or 1?
Yes, please, Sarah, if I could.
Chris?
Yeah, it's just under 4.2 under the table, where it's the mainstream schools additional grant. Is that what the supplementary grant was this year?
That's the additional, yes, that's the additional grant for this year. Going forward, it'll be amalgamated into NFF, and that's what the government said.
But so it was it called for 22-23? Was that what was the supplementary benefit in our current budgets?
Not in current budgets. That is the additional funding. The government promised a £2 billion boost to the schools to address the cost of living crisis, and so they've given the 400 million, of which Bristol has 3.3 million in high needs, already included in our allocation, 453 million. The 10.749 is in addition to the 453 million to mainstream schools. Yeah. Yes, but for 23-24 in financial year 23-24. Yeah.
But in 22-23, where we are currently, we had what was called a supplementary grant this year, didn't we?
Yeah. Can I come in?
That ends at the end of March 23, and is rolled into these new rates. But there is this new mainstream school additional grant, another catchy name, that starts being paid from April 23 for a year, unless you're an academy, and then will be rolled into the 24-25 funding rates.
That's what I thought the case was. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to double count.
Yeah, it's been rebaselined, Chris. So each year is being rebaselined and rolled into the formula. And at the moment, this is an additional grant with etc. So it's outside of the formula that will be incorporated in future years. So Simon's correct. It is an additionality.
Steph.
Angel, still on that table. So the 453 includes Bristol's allocation of the high needs.
Yes.
400,000. So have you also incorporated the additional allocation out to schools, since there's also been the guidance about how that should be shared out to special PRU and APs?
No, the schools element 10.749 has not been included in the 453 million.
I wasn't talking about the mainstream bit. I was talking about the high needs aspect.
Oh, yes, the one included within the 453 million is already reflected in the formula. Yeah.
The funding of it, is the cost aspect of it also in your forecasts going forward?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? I think I'd be quite interested to get Richard and perhaps Denise's reflections on the allocation of those grants. Was it anticipated, or you know, how I can see that we're obviously still got ongoing rising costs, but just to get your reflections on it, please.
Does Richard want to go first, or do you want me to cover it, Richard? So I
Sorry.
can't see Richard.
Sorry, Denise. No, I sorry. I was just coming off mute again. Sorry, it's taken me a while. Yeah. So I mean, we are, in terms of the allocations. Obviously, they are is a positive picture in terms of the allocations that we've had. We recognise obviously that the challenges in terms of the pressures that schools are under at the moment. So I think in terms of looking at this as in terms of our sort of moving it forward, it's around our sort of sorry, I've got, can you hear me?
We can, Richard.
Yes, yeah, absolutely fine. Can you hear us, Richard? Okay, I think that one's sent over to you, Denise.
Lost him, so yeah, I'll cover it, and hopefully I'm saying the same sorts of things to what Richard was going to say. So we'll maybe start with the high needs. Obviously, in the autumn statement, the 2 billion additionality was announced, so we were anticipating it, and the actual allocation that's come through to high needs is slightly more than what we had calculated when we did the initial calculation, because obviously they've used a different methodology. So I think Bristol has fared well in their portion of that, which I think is just over £3 million additionality. Within the actual deficit management plan, we hadn't initially assumed this funding, but the reason why the position doesn't change as much is because actually we've got an increase volume of our young people with EHCP, so the two sort of offset each other. So in reality, the position looks initially for this year as though it's virtually unchanged, but we will be building that in. And I think I'm going to probably say it now, and it's probably useful to say, particularly as we are in a public meeting, it's being recorded. So it's a message to the DfE. We are assuming that is not a one-off, and it will be baselined going forward. So hopefully they're listening into this, and we'll take that forward as well as a clear action. And then we're obviously now reflecting on building on that in the future years. And when we come back for the next forum with the refresh model, we'll be assuming that. So it has helped the overarching position within the deficit management plan, and very welcomed as well as part of that. So obviously we will be working through with the various settings in terms of the proposed spend and etc. as well, and picking up some of the points that our colleague made earlier around some of the expectations related to that fund. So that's good news. I think in terms of the element for schools, again, very, very welcomed, additional 10 million over and above what we had anticipated. And I think it was useful, obviously, following on from the conversation we had previously about the transfer between blocks, recognising the significant challenges that schools are having as well in terms of their inflationary pressures, their pay awards, of which this is intended to help to also support. One of the other areas we're still waiting for some clarification on is the energy and the energy costs, because again, that has been an increase, a significant increased pressure for schools. The autumn statement indicated that public sector wouldn't be part of the scheme, but the information released earlier this week indicated that public sector will be. But again, you may have know more than me, but the initial assessments that we've been doing indicates there is still a pressure, etc. So I think this will be a welcome contribution for all of you in terms of actually meeting some of those increase in cost. It is outside of the formula, and they've given direct allocation. I think Angel's got a paper or an appendix in the paper which sort of indicates this is the methodology to be used. So I think they've taken it completely out of the formula and used a different methodology, of which Angel may have more information than me on in terms of how that will be directly allocated to you. So I'm hoping it goes some way to mitigate some of the pressures that we're all experiencing.
Thank you, Denise. That's really helpful. It's great to get the reflections on what will be the final DSG allocation. So thank you for going
Hi,
through that.
Sarah.
Hopefully the DFE were listening. Hi, Richard.
Sarah.
I know you had over some
Sorry.
trouble. Are you back with us now?
Cut off in my prime, wasn't I? Sorry about that.
I think Denise has covered it very well, so I'm happy to move on to the next item if you like, Richard.
Well, the main point I just wanted to raise was how, obviously you talked about the drop in pupil numbers, and, we do need to keep an eye on that because that could mask some of the funding pressures that schools are under. So that was the point I was going to make, but happy to move on. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. Thank you. Okay. What I might do now, because one of the actions is in relation to voting again on the transfer of the 0.5 from the schools block to high needs block. I think it would be appropriate to talk about it now and then move on to the early years piece. So we did vote on this last time at the forum and we were happy to support it. Can anyone raise any objections to the movement as it currently stands, or are we happy to continue to support that one? All approved. Thank you very much. Okay, Angel, then if you could take us on to item, is it 5 on that report? The early years, number 5, the early years section, please. National funding formula.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I'm glad Richard is back and he knows a lot more than myself in early years. So I'll briefly take you through. Early years allocation has increased. The main changes are actually within maintained to nursery school supplement rates, as Richard highlighted earlier on. And colleagues, as per previous years, consulted with the sector in terms of, the early years national funding formulas. And in terms of rates, we've had a 6p increase in 3 to 4 year old. We also had 9p increase in 2 year old base rates. So as outlined in table 4 on page 17 of your meeting pack, and so the majority of providers responded, supported the pass the full 9p onto the providers, and the LA would, as per previous years, pass the full 9p to the providers. The providers' rates will increase to £5.86, and as per previous years, we retain 3p for the central administration for the 2 year old elements, and then for 3 to 4 year old, I did raise, they agree the percentage is 47% and disagree was 53%. Did ask my colleagues, what does that mean? We suggesting pass the full 6p on to the providers. I couldn't understand that bit, but it transpires that 6p is not enough for the providers. Unfortunately, we don't have any more than the full uplift. Give it to the providers, so we will pass the 6p. Full 6p to providers, and so that will raise the rates to £4.94 from £4.88 last year per hour. And then, so in terms of other elements, and the key ones is early years same maintained the current rate. So 70% of the participated providers, support that decision. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Richard.
Well, the main issue is that the hourly increases are not keeping pace with costs for our early year settings, which is one of the building pressures that they have. 2 year old funding has been unsustainable for quite some time. So even with that uplift, it still doesn't make that doesn't support the early year settings in their sustainability. But obviously the M&S supplement is welcome. But yeah, the rates are still a real pressure for our settings in early years.
Okay, thank you both. I think now we go through whether or not we want to approve those rates. Is that right, Angel?
Yeah.
But before we do that, I'll open up some questions. And Simon, you may want to come here in terms of those rates and any from your perspective. But is there anything, before we vote on the proposal, is there anything else that we can actually do, Richard, apart from obviously passing it all on or not? Is there scope to do anything else, or is that really the only decision we're able to do?
Yeah, well, we're obviously passing those on in full. I think the supplements are obviously, there is some discretion about how we use the supplements that are identified, but those have been obviously part of the consultation as well. So, for example, on the quality supplement, that is a discretionary one for the local authority, but that provides all of our system leadership. So a lot of the support and provision for improving early years is actually supported by the sector themselves, and that money funds that work.
Thank you. So I think we can see that most of the proposals are supported from the consultation, although I think the one that Angel was referring to was the 3 and 4 year old base rate.
I think it's really referring to the fact they don't feel it's enough, because we're actually saying we're going to pass on the full 6p. So there's not much, if they disagree, we don't have a figure to pass on, if you see what I mean.
Okay, I think I've heard that previously, but it would be good to get some, if there were any written responses to the consultation, that would have helped us to highlight that, because I think for me, just reading it as a paper, I'm not quite sure why there was such a response to that particular one. But Simon, if you want to come here, please.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Richard. I think that was like 6p, that's not enough. No, was kind of a general thing rather than thinking it through. Yeah, but in terms of the wider thing, obviously the maintained nursery school supplement's really welcome. I mean, a lot of this we kind of covered. Any increase is welcome, but it's not enough. So in terms of transformation, I think in the end, looking at the wider thing, there's a lot of things early years settings do. And I still don't understand where in the transformation programme integrated working with health and welfare fits, because to me, that's the only long-term sustainable solution, is as a recognition of the broader early intervention work across the early years sector, and how is that recognised, particularly in our areas of highest deprivation, where we're holding an awful lot of things that maybe years ago would have been held by social care. And this is probably the same case in primary schools and all kinds of things. And it seems there's a lot of work which is really valuable, which is sitting, we're not quite sure where does the crossover with, say, what the work health visitors are doing, with the work schools are doing, with the work early families in focus is doing. How is this integrated? How does this join together as a system? And a kind of bigger, more, which is maybe what Denise was referring to earlier, in terms of a strategy going forwards, because it's particularly like for resilience for the future. I don't think the solution can't just sit within one sort of sector. It's broader. So that's kind of like where I'd like to see it going forward, because I think that is the only solution. Because as you've all said, it's not enough. It's not enough what's being put forward. It goes some of the way, but it doesn't go enough. So we can't find the solution just within this forum.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Simon. It's that whole package, isn't it? That whole support around a family or a child. Abby.
Thank you. Sorry, it took me ages to figure out how to put my hand up. I'm not used to Zoom at all. So if you saw me waving like this, it's because I couldn't figure out where the button was. Simon, I'm really pleased that you said that, actually, and it's made me really quite excited. So one of the big pieces of work that I've tasked my team to look at is about this wider transformation programme. So what does a universal offer of help look like to schools? How does that impact, looking at all of it? So I am happy to take that away as an action, Sarah, to come back to a later forum to start beginning having those conversations. We're working through the bigger strategic programme across all of children's services now, and actually schools, you all have to be a part of that, because actually we're talking about lots of the same children. There's lots that we can do collaboratively. So I'll take that away, because we've started that thinking, and I'm happy to come back to a future forum and start to think about that with you all.
Thank you. I think that'd be very welcome, and especially as Denise mentioned, the update on the programme as it currently stands as well, and do a combined effort would be great.
Yeah, we can do that. I picked that up with Richard already.
Yeah, there is also something to think about the work that's taking place at the moment in relation to the ICB, and then also ensuring that the early intervention and early years is part of that journey. So again, I think that there may be something that our colleagues on the ICB, I think it's probably Hugh who represents us there, to ensure that that early years is part of that that whole systems thinking that's taking place, and also some of the exploration around how we use technology as well, and more innovation as well. So, and it may be something that we could also possibly utilise the subgroup to do a little bit of that work, and some of that thinking about the preventative strategy and how we could feed it into those conversations.
Absolutely, sounds like an interesting one to follow up on. If you could put those down as actions, please, Sam. And then we can have a look at those outside of when we do our planning meetings. Thank you. Okay, so any more questions, Sam?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, great, thank you. My worry is with the nursery closures countrywide, there are approximately 4,000, just over 4,000 nurseries that closed last year. With the living wage going up by, I believe it's 9% for 23-year-olds, I'm worried that the 6 pence per hour is going to cause more closures. For my colleagues, it's the items that keep being raised in our sector, in the PVIs. I know it's going to impact all of us, but we don't manage to get to the real living wage. Well, not many nurseries do. There are obviously certain stuff, but it is something, I know there's nothing we can do. And I think that's why the 6p is not enough, although there is nothing else for it. It's going to impact everybody countrywide as we go through the rest of the year from April onwards, if people are raising salaries by that much, plus the on costs. Just an obvious point, but I just felt it has to be noted.
But I think it's a very valid one though, Sam. I think that the continuing rise of salary costs not keeping up in line with funding is a challenge in lots of sectors, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
And sort of feeds into what Richard mentioned before about the recruitment and retention. However, if we're not able to meet those minimum salary levels that you get in other places, then that remains a challenge. So yes, thank you for flagging that. And I think there is ongoing work in that area with Richard, Simon, and the Early Years Task and Finish group.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Okay, conscious of time, so I'll move then just to voting, unless there's any other questions. No? Okay, so Angel, if you just remind me of what we're being asked to confirm specifically. So I can't see
sorry, just trying to unmute myself. Yeah, I think the key things are agreed pass on the full 9p to the providers for 2-year-old, and the 6p to 3-year-old base rate increase, plus full 6p onto the providers, and a 3p retention of the 2-year-old base rate for the central functions as per previous years, and I think these are the key ones, and earlier and maintain the current rate. That has been agreed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And we've got the table of responses from the sector, and also Sam and Simon have fed back. Tom?
Has the constitution changed? I haven't been here for 5 years. Does a support staff representative have a vote?
Sam, are you able to confirm?
Do you want me to come in? So if we're voting on the funding formula, there is limited to school members, academy members and PVI representatives.
Smashing, thank you. So no then, yeah, all right.
Okay, so I think we're recommending to do what we can to pass on the funding to early years nursery provisions. So unless there's any objections, that's how we've done this previously with voting on Zoom. Rather than raising hands, just raise your hand if you object to what is being proposed. Okay, thank you very much. Angel, could you briefly take us then through what we were asking us in relation to the school central services block?
Yeah,
Yes.
the central services block, the 23-24 allocation total is about £2.7 million to 709, and there is, a reduction from the previous year's 2.742. So we need to cover a lot of central functions, and in this meeting, I need your approval on, how we spend the money. So if you go to table 5, unfortunately, this table is split between page 18 and 19 of your meeting pack. You'll see there are the key functions which we have outlined as per previous years, and we intend to allocate that £2.7 million allocation money on. So the school's license, which was a quote from ESFA, so that figure is based on the quote. The rest is based on the previous year's allocations. So the significant one, as you can see, is there is no changes, no uplift being given to pay and pensions, no uplift, or actually a 20% reduction to combined service. Prudential borrowings is not needed, as we already know since last year. So going forward, we will need to look at, what's in combined services, monitor our service provisions and the resources requirements, because none of the no one can sustain the 20% budget cut, given the increase in the cost of service provision, staff costs, etc. But for 23-24, the proposed budget spending, apart from 348,000, which was quoted by ESFA for the school's license fees, and the rest is as per previous years. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for taking us through that. Can you just remind me what the combined services are?
The combined.
Sorry. Yeah, there's a table underneath. My apologies. I can see that now. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Has anyone got any questions in relation to the services provided from this fund part of the DSG? I think that's really clear in terms of ring fencing, how that's going to be spent. So thank you for that clarity. Any objections to voting on how that's going to be largely spent? No? Okay, thank you very much. But we do recognise that it's less than it was the previous year and costs are rising. So recognise that that may prove a challenge in providing some of those services that are listed. Thank you. Okay, I'll take us on then to the next item, which is item 7.
It's still 6, the schools block.
Sorry, schools block. Okay, over to you, Angel.
Yeah, this one is focusing on schools blocks as following the meeting in October with the Schools Forum Finance Subgroup, and November meeting we've consulted the sector and the forum in terms of what factors we should be applying in 23-24 funding formulas to allocate the schools block money. And based on the agreements we've had from the schools forum and the voting consultation outcome of the sector, and which we shared with the schools forum formally in November, we have applied that to the funding. So the schools block allocation total, as you can see in table 1 of page 25 of your meeting pack, is £325.5 million. Of which £2.5 million was the growth, and £10.9 million was premises-led budget pot. The rest is 312.4 is the pupil-led DSG funding. So in November Schools Forum, we have agreed and to transfer 0.5% to High Needs block. That's 1.627 million. And we have agreed to set aside £2 million growth fund, and the balance remaining will be allocated to mainstream schools, which is £321.8 million. adding up to the total of £325.5 million. You will see in Appendix B, the £321.8 million has been fully allocated, and which makes up the Appendix C, the school's totals as well. So again, another note, this does not include the £10.749 million, the mainstream schools additional grant, which we discussed earlier on. So the pupil-led DHG funding, 312.4 million is October census driven. So we have a fall in the primary school age pupil numbers, which is offset by the secondary increase in numbers. So there's a net increase about 1% in terms of school age pupil numbers in Bristol, which led to the increase in funding allocation as well. The premises-led funding is for PFI, split size, and NNDR, and those are advised by the ESFA as well. A growth fund, obviously, we've discussed that in November meeting. It'll be we've got allocation of 2.2. We agreed to spend 2 million, to set aside 2 million, so that 200,000 will just go into the balancing to allocate it through the formula, really. We talked about transfer already, which we agreed, which is great, yeah. And the key points, I think it's been covered in terms of explaining what's in the schools funding elements. Points 3.13 to 3.15 is historic changes to the formulas. Just we left it there just to remind colleagues here. Yeah, and point 4 is reiterate what we agreed in November is £2 million. We agreed to set aside, and then point 5 is reiterate what we agreed in November again. So what are the agreements? So we will fund NNDR split size properly as per previous years. Minimum funding guarantee we set as 0%. And the rest of the funding, we will remaining funding after applying the formulas and the factors will be used to apply to additional education needs, AEM factors. No preference to primary or secondary. Lump sum is set aside. We go for 126.627 for both primary and secondary. And so these are the key things we agreed in November. We applied through the formulas. And also a reminder of the base rates for primary KS3 and Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 really. The other highlights is this 5.5 really. So after applying the above factors, we've got remaining unallocated fund. This will increase the AEM factors by 2% above 22-23 level. Yeah. So £69 million is distributed through this. Yeah. But that's just to remind. Yeah. So
thank you, Angel. I think that was through the document. Hopefully that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So all the impacts are outlined. Underneath the table. Yeah. And the school level information is in Appendix C if you're interested to see your relevant schools. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Angel. Okay, so we did discuss this at length at the last forum meeting in relation to prioritising different rates, and we obviously had the feedback from the smaller working group that have looked at the rates in more detail than we will be able to do at the wider forum. So if I just take you to 5.1, Angel helpfully took us through the 5 points there in relation to what we're being asked to further endorse so that it can then be taken to Council and Cabinet. So unless there's any objections, I would propose that we continue with what we agreed previously and make that recommendation, take that forward. Everyone happy? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'll move us on then to item 7. And
Sarah,
a reminder
can I
of
just come in terms of a reminder that Schools Forum have an opportunity to feedback any key points that you want to either raise with Cabinet and Council so that they can give due consideration when they're setting the budget, and also programmes going forward, any areas of concerns that you want to raise. And it's an opportunity to do it for each of the funds. So again, if there's any key points, you probably want to summarise that so that it can be captured, and then Councillor Craig will ensure that it's presented to Council and Cabinet for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Denise. I think I'm happy for 4 members to comment too, but I think from our perspective, it's helpful to see that there is more funding. However, there's ongoing cost pressures. Specifically, we've talked about the early years challenges, length. So I think that would be a good one to raise. That is a continued concern for us. Primary places in relation to supporting falling roles in some of our primary schools, and I think one of the other challenges is in relation to the national funding formula when that comes in, because the Bristol rates are still misaligned. So we need to make sure that we can phase that in a way that there doesn't see big drop-offs in terms of funding for schools going forward. Steph, did you want to add to that, please?
I just noted that it looks like, in fact, the 23-24 factors seem to be taking us further from the national funding formula rates, and wondered if that was in response to consultation or the discussions within the finance subgroup and the schools forum here, given that at some point we will end up with a fair transition to national funding formula.
I'm not sure if there is any specific factors you're referring to, Steph, but what we've done in September, we shared the NFF, the range for each of the factors. We have done the comparison. Majority of Bristol's factors are where we think, if not above, the national funding formula range. So we need to be falling within that range. So there are 1 or 2 factors which we're behind, obviously, yeah. So I'm not sure if there's anyone you specifically referring to, yeah, which we can have a look at it, outside this meeting.
It wasn't to comment on the fact that the factors aren't above. It was more that I think we, in some cases, seem to be diverging more when, I had wondered whether it would be helpful to try and maintain some alignment with national funding formula. But that's fine. Thank you, Angel.
We need to move 10% closer to the national funding formula this year and next year. And the year after is 25-26. We need to demonstrate to move 25% closer to the national funding formula. So that's why when we set the parameters, we need to make sure there is a range for each of the factors. We need to make sure, we're falling within that range, or, whether we on the lower band or the upper band, then is still LA's preference, if you know what I mean, and based on the consultation outcome as well.
I think that's a helpful update, actually, Angel, to show, how we had, what time frame we have to move over to national funding formula, because I wasn't aware of that. So actually, if it's still quite far away, but we still have to evidence that it's being moved closer to, I think what Steph just said is very valid. Simon?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Obviously, the subgroup that looked at this, alongside the consultation that the schools that made, the steer over the last few years has been to try and channel as much kind of the extra funding that we've got to the kind of the AEN factors, so to channel the money into the deprivation so that it reaches the pupils that are most vulnerable. So that is why those sort of, like the Adachi and some of the other ones are still well above national funding, because historically they always have been. So we've moved some of the, like the basic entitlement, the primary, the Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, actually, even though they are under the national funding formula rates, they're moving closer to it. As Angel said, we've got to move. So we've moved within the brackets, hence why the actual increase on those rates is actually much more significant than the increase on the other rates, because we've moved into those brackets. So that's always been the steer that the sub-finance group wanted to do, and I think that was typically what Schools Forum wanted to do in the past as well.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. That's a good one to feed back, please, Denise, is that we felt quite passionate that we continue to support our pupils with additional needs. Hence, whatever funding would be left over would then be bolstering those rates that those factors that specifically support those pupils.
Yeah, and I think that will be a key point in thinking about the transition. So once we do move, and how we ensure that there isn't the cliff edge that you spoke about, Sarah, and that transition approach is appropriately planned for. Great, excellent, thank you. Well, Councillor Craig is here, so hopefully, Councillor Craig, you've picked some of those up because you'll be making it or presenting the paper, but we'll work with some Democratic Services to get the paper, and it will definitely be in the Cabinet paper and also full Council paper. So I don't know if you've got anything you want to add, Councillor Craig, before we move on. Sorry, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I've been purposely quiet, just kind of leaving members of the forum. But yes, I've picked up on all of the decisions that have been made, and I'll make sure that your views are also articulated in the, when I make my statement to full Cabinet to get this through. So no, I don't have anything further to add at this stage. Again, other than, it's good to see that we've got a little bit more funding. The situation around the maintained nursery schools, I know a couple of my colleagues will breathe a little sigh of relief, but the challenges still remain, as you know, particularly around the DSG. But yeah, thank you for your work that you've all done on this, and yeah, we'll get it through Cabinet. Leave it to me.
Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing the feedback. Great. So I'll take us on then to item 7, and Richard, who's leading on that one?
This is me, this one. So the next part is an update on the delivering better value in SEND. So the paper just outlines some of the key updates that we have around this programme, and the key areas of focus that we're going to include in the forthcoming grant application. So the recommendation today is to just note the content of the paper so that you understand the focus of the grant application, and if it's successful, how it aligns with our DSG management plan and the high needs block recovery plan. So you'll know from previous updates I've given around the DBV programme, the objective of that is to identify local and national opportunities to improve the outcomes for children with SEND. And there has been a programme based on 3 phases, so 3 different modules that we've been engaging with since September. And we've worked through the 3 modules, and we're now at the grant application stage. So module 1 was about understanding the volume and type of support for Bristol's children and young people, what they've been receiving historically, and what that might look like going forward. And then module 2 spent time looking at things in more detail, so deeper dives into understanding how the current processes, the current outcomes are working, and how to achieve those high quality outcomes that we all want for our children and young people with SEND. And those diagnostics have looked at data, we've looked at case studies, and had feedback from different stakeholders as well. And then module 3 is looking at how we can practically implement solutions to some of the areas that we've looked at in more detail in module 2. So just to sort of highlight the kinds of work we've done, so over 1 million data points have been analysed, nearly 30 detailed case reviews have been looked at, 100 external partners engaged with, and analysis of previous feedback For example, annual parent carer surveys have been included in that work. So we're now focused on the grant application, and the grant application will obviously include some of our findings. So just some key ones that we wanted to highlight was around the priority, the high priority cohorts of children and where they are in our different settings. So you can see the first table at the bottom of page 2 identifies the number of children with EHCPs by provision, and you can see there that our maintained special schools and our mainstream special schools hold the most children, and then our mainstream schools, and that accounts for 67% of active EHCPs in the city. The next table looks at our high needs block total expenditure by provision, and again you can see that the largest spend is in our maintained special schools and academies at 33.8 million, and that represents 41% of our total high needs block mitigated expenditure. So starting to get more detail about where the spend and where the children are being educated. Looking at independent non-maintained schools, costs 11.9 million, but it accommodates 11.8 fewer EHCPs than maintain times fewer EHCPs than maintain special schools. And so therefore the deeper analysis concentrated on the mainstream and special because of the numbers. And then you'll see some comparisons around EHCP proportions by provision against our stat neighbours. And you can see there that we have a lower rate of children in mainstream schools and settings compared to our most of our statistical neighbours, and also the England average. If you are looking at the table at the top of page, it's top of page 36 in the papers, isn't it? You can see our EHCP rate per 100 compared to our statistical neighbours, and what you'll notice here is that we are when we include that rate of children and young people on funded SEN support, which is the pale blue box, we're actually have the highest rate of support adjusted to population. So when it's just looking at EHCPs, we are lower when we add in that non-statutory top-up funding that we provide in Bristol, and we are assuming that that is not provided in other statistical neighbours, local authorities. We know that we are one of only a handful of local authorities who do provide this funding, but you can see that includes when that's included, that our spend is higher than other stat neighbours. The work that we did around the deep dives also brought together 3 key areas that we wanted to look at and suggest that if we did work in these areas, it'd make a significant impact on the quality of the provision and the value for money that we get from our spend in high needs block. So inclusive mainstream settings, looking at their quality, consistency and culture and relationships with parents, etc. Utilising an awareness of support across Bristol, so that support being provided at the right time and right support at the right time, and that parental confidence in mainstream provision, so making sure that communication and co-production is embedded in the work that we do. So the grant application is being developed now to go in. However, given the design of the funding programme, there's likely to be 2 key themes that we were going to be looking at. So taking all of that evidence together, we're going to be looking at strengthening the relationships between school, family and child. So we're improving those experiences for children with SEND in mainstream settings, and then strengthening this relationship between schools and the wider system. So we have that transparent, consistent and financially sustainable processes that are underpinned by some robust monitoring and accountability. So both of those areas actually do align with improvement work to date and areas we've identified in the high needs block recovery plan. And so obviously what we aim to do is align the activity through the DBV programme with the DSG management plan. And so our next steps at this point, so in January, we're focusing on the detail of the grant application and completion of the grant requirements. 4th of February is when we're planning to seek Cabinet approval to apply for the funding. And then before the 24th of February, we have to submit the final application. And then if successful, the funding's released at the end of March. And our implementation will begin in April. So that's the key sort of overview about where we are with the DBV. Happy to take questions. Alison Hurley, who's been delivering the work on that, holds a lot more detail on it than me because she's been living and breathing it. So if it's something I can't answer today, either Denise probably jump in, but other than that, I can take the questions away, obviously, and come back to you.
Okay, thank you, Richard, for taking us through. I'll come to you in a second, Tom and Simon. Thank you. Thank you for taking us through the delivering best value programme. Specifically, you mentioned that the second phase was discussing some of the outcomes. If I just bear with me, we were looking at the module 2 and then module 3.
Yeah.
Were there any specific findings? And I think it's helpful to get an estimation of spend in these areas. And I know largely the remit of Forum is around financial probity of schools funding, but is there any other specific key findings from that module that you're able to share with us?
So we're still finalising the actual figures, which is why they're not in the report, because obviously we want them to be accurate and clear for you. So there is further work, information relating to those costs, etc. But we're just finalising and agreeing those with Newton, our partners who've been working with us and doing the diagnostics, and then that will come back to Forum at that point. Yeah.
And do you have a sense of the size of the grant that we would apply for?
So the grant will be $1 million. We will receive $1 million. Yeah.
Thank you. Tom.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. Hopefully, if we can go through them one by one. You were suggesting with the your mentioning of discretionary payments that you have. Are you suggesting there is a chance that you may be rolling back some of the extensive extra send? I know you're saying you're applying for a grant, but is there a feeling from the council that perhaps we should not be doing this?
No, the piece of work we're doing is we've obviously been trying to establish the actual costs, the actual funding that we're using and where it's being targeted. So this has been about the analysis of that. What we have identified in the DSG management plan and the proposals that were put forward in the engagement process that I did during October into November was around the fact that we need to look at it and understand how it's working. And then we did put it forward as a proposal, and the engagement process, people were happy that we need to look at that in more detail. We need to understand the impact of that funding and how well it is supporting those children, young people, and is it being targeted at the right children in terms of their should they be going through a needs assessment, should they be utilising element 1 and 2 funding that comes through the school's budget, for example. So there's work to do, but there's no decision about what we're doing yet. We're still looking at this in detail, and then the implementation plan will be coming back as part of the grant application. But we don't have any clear plan about what we're saying we're doing with that at the moment. It's just really to establish the picture in Bristol and understand it in comparison to our stat neighbours, for example, like the graph identified.
Yeah, in the budget consultation document, there was quite a lot of talk about having a more joined up approach with this sort of thing. But for my second item, I am poorly prepared for this. I'm covering for Steve, he's unwell today. But I would just like to point out this is going to be too late for St. Barnabas's, that has 93% vulnerable children at that school. It has a very strong SEND background, and it's oven, as somebody put out in the statement, it's oven ready for for any new programs we're going to be doing with SEND. So are we as a council and I know this is not in the council committee, but as an associated committee and the council, are we prepared to let sort of market forces end this endeavour? Is there nothing that we can do to use those skills and experience in some sort of, to save it in some sense?
Okay, so I think they are two separate issues, because I think the issues at St Barnabas are related to the number of pupils on roll, and the falling rolls making the school unsustainable in terms of its funding and its finances. Yes, the school does support children with SEND, as all mainstream schools do, and St Barnabas does have a number of children with SEND. That is the case, and the proposal around closure is linked to its obviously long-term financial sustainability. It's not to do with any issue with the quality of the school or the provision that the children receive. But the fact that the school provides well for SEND does not mean that we can somehow move the school into, say, the specialist places programme, for example, because we can't turn a school into a special school, for example. There are systems processes that we have to follow in order to do that. So the two things, whilst there's a overlap between the SEND provision that we know St Barnabas provides, which is good quality and we know is valued, the issue is the financial sustainability of the school in the long term, because as you probably know, there's only I think the school is a third full at the moment, and that will ultimately affect the quality of the SEND support for those children as it becomes more and more difficult to finance it. And I know that governors spent a long time looking at this prior to the consultation process, looking at opportunities along with the local authority, but also with other academy trusts as well, who were looking at potential solutions. So whilst the two things, I can see how they connect through SEND, I think there are different driving forces between the work that we're doing around the whole system and the circumstances of this individual school.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for raising it. I think, although it's not necessarily the remit of the forum, it is something that we're aware of and we've talked about. And it's obviously never an easy decision to pursue a closure of a school, but it's just reflective of there was a large-scale increase in pupils that are now making its way to our secondaries, but there isn't the incoming pupils coming through at the younger age. There aren't the birth rates to sustain the level of provision that we've currently got across Bristol. So as Richard said, it's more about not having enough pupils in Bristol versus what capacity we've got. So it's something that we've talked about at forum before, and talked about, do we preference rates for primary pupils to support their budget, which you can only go so far with that if you're only a third full. And doing that planning piece across the LA is something that I know Richard and the team are very conscious of, and working with those provisions to make sure that where we can make schools as viable as possible. Simon.
Yeah, it was the statistic you put that Bristol has more children in special schools than statistical neighbours. That's correct. Yeah, I understood that. Right. So is there what's the reason for that? And I'm kind of thinking from where I sit and what I see, we all know early intervention makes the biggest difference. But when we're having children where we're being told there's a 3-year wait to see a paediatrician, there's 2 or 3 years for an autism assessment, those are crucial years where, had the intervention been made earlier, was there more support around the family, EHCPs were in place, the mainstream schools would be better able to support. But at the moment, we're getting a situation where some of our families don't feel their children are wanted in the school they're going to because they can see this child's needs and they feel they won't be able to meet them. So we're getting an increasing number of children saying they want to stay in nursery. So we've got more children now in nursery schools who should be in reception. And it's a really, it's a complex picture because, again, I think I'm sounding like a broken record, but there isn't the early, you know, you shouldn't wait 3 years for a paediatrician report. You know, we know what these children, we can see these children's needs, but someone else has to do it somewhere up the line and you have to wait years for it. It's so frustrating for parents. I can see why they would be unhappy, you know, and it does feel like that's probably, so in the end, you know, special school is like the answer because we're not meeting it where we could because of things not working together properly. Is that possible?
I think you've articulated some of the reasons quite clearly, Simon. Yes, and I think it's that it aligns with some of the findings from the inspection as well. I'm really sorry, the lights are all going out behind me. I'm obviously not moving enough where I'm sitting. I'm really sorry. It's those are definitely factors, and if you think about the inspection outcomes, it's around a lack of confidence in the system more generally, and that is part of what we are needing to do around making sure we have that consistent inclusive approach across all of our schools in the city, you know, obviously the contributions towards assessments, etc., because what that's leading to is I'm really sorry. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Let me just, you can't even see me. That's better. Sorry about that. It's the council trying to save money. We need to look at all of this in terms of building that confidence, that inclusive practice across the sector, so that parents aren't having to feel they have to resort to specialist provision or sometimes even an EHCP in order to get their child's needs met. So these factors are all in there. So I think that's I agree with you, Simon. I believe those are contributing factors to it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think Aileen, you are next. I am conscious of time though, so we've got one more agenda item. So if you could provide us a brief question, please, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the question I have is it's about that. How is the council promoting its inclusive approach? Is the local authority aware of where best practice really is, and is there enough challenge where things have not gone particularly well? And we can, you know, there are certain reasons for it. It might be that an excellent SENCO leaves and a school has a brand new SENCO who's not as aware of the situation. It could be a whole range of reasons. But I think the local authority, it needs to consult with the mainstream sector across the board to help support and make that approach more inclusive.
Yeah, there's ongoing work around workforce development. That's a piece of work that's been done across the local area. I mean, Tracy will know lots about that through IEG, but that is exactly what we are looking at doing, making sure that the training and development we offer is related to the needs of the local area, and also the SENCO clusters and networks that we've reintroduced is about trying to hold hold SENCOs, provide those updates, but also obviously if you're a new SENCO, looking at what is on offer for those people coming new into post, because you're right, people leaving make quite a significant difference to schools. So that ongoing sort of commitment to understanding the needs in the local area, and then the training and workforce development that goes alongside it, is critical to that.
Thanks, Richard. Councillor Craig.
Thank you.
Hi, I just really wanted to kind of reiterate the point that Simon was making, and that the other question that was asked about, you know, what's the council going to do, particularly in relation to the non-statutory top-up funding. I think we, you know, before any final decision is made on what we do or don't do, we need, I need to know, is the extra money that we have been paying out, what difference is it actually making? We still got a huge uphill task, I think, around the parental confidence in the mainstream provision, because if you're talking, when I'm talking to parents with children with special educational needs, because of their experiences in some schools, they're all just like running towards the specialist provision. I have always been of the view I'd like to take maybe half of that funding that we are giving to specialist providers and transfer that money and put that money into the mainstream school sector. But there are really good areas of good practice, I think, but this isn't something that's going to resolve ourselves overnight. And we've heard, we have to bring parents with us and kind of raise that confidence and work with you all as schools to look at what is required, what do you need to be able to deliver much more inclusive provision for our SEN children. So I think maybe when you meet at the next meeting, I'll have had a view, and I'll be talking to Abby and Richard about what's coming through this, and we can have a straight up discussion, because I think I said it at the last meeting, we are one of very few local authorities who still provide this. And given our financial challenges, I also have to consider is, if it's making a difference and it's a positive difference, then yeah, there's an argument to keep. But if it isn't, we need to have a conversation about how we're going to manage this. So it's not no and it's not yes, it's wait and see. But yeah, I just need more of the detail about what's happening with that top up and what impact it's making. But like I said, I want to see the spend go in a completely different way and pour more money into mainstream provision. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Craig. Steph, we've got time for just a quick one, please.
It was just a request on that analysis of non-statutory top-up. I believe within the Wecker area, North Somerset, for example, I believe provide non-statutory top-up. And given the close proximity within that Wecker area, it would be important to consider that from a more than local authority position. Otherwise, I think there could be bizarre impacts around pupil movements and where parents may believe they may target to get better provision or better support for their children. So just a plea to consider probably the Wecker area amongst that analysis.
Can I just quickly come back at Steph? I think there is some work happening already where we are talking to our neighbouring authorities about how we develop more specialist provision, but closer to home, for example. But we do it jointly as opposed to us going off separately. And so there is some work in hand, I know, that's happening. It feels like a slow burn, and we need to kind of really kick it into move it up a gear. But I do know those discussions have been going on for a little while now.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Denise, I think you had your hand up and then put it back down.
I was just conscious of time, but I think I've just really wanted to sort of reiterate the point that the diagnostic work that's coming through the DBV programme is looking at the west of England, stat neighbours, national picture, and bringing to us best practice that's there, and also all of the data evidence, because it is a national programme. So we have got the benefit of being benchmarked and the data being cut in a whole range of different lenses. But I think the key point is, being clear that we avoid the unintended consequences and we look much broader when we were actually looking at the transformation. But I just wanted to give you that confidence, Stephanie, that all of the data set, I think it's been presented in this way at this stage, but we have got data which looks at what's happening in the region as well as stat neighbours and nationally as well.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you very much all. So just been asked to note the application of the grant. So I think we've noted that. Thank you, and every success in the process. So our final item is number 8, and that's an update on the Belonging with SEND programme. We're asked to review the progress, approve the rollover of the programme funding for next academic year, and the extension of the management role, and the widening of the criteria to include voluntary and community sector. So who's taken us through this one, please, Richard? Oh, you're on mute.
That's me.
Well done. Yes, Tommy Jarvis, a colleague.
Oh, hi, Tommy. Right, over to you, please. If you could just give us a brief overview of the paper, that would be helpful.
I'll give you a very quick review. So, so Richard brought this agenda item to the meeting at the end of September, of which point there was a couple of agreements which I've put into the report, and hopefully you've had a chance to review that. But the idea is taking some of that funding and giving it to schools in the form of grants to allow them to test or try new interventions that are based on evidence-based practice across the city. So we've had 2 grant rounds. So we've broken the grant down into 3 components. So component 1 is larger grants looking at strong evidence base that hasn't been delivered in Bristol before. So that's thinking of, you know, the kind of evidence from the Education Endowment Foundation or the Early Intervention Foundation as well. So that type of evidence, whether that can be delivered in Bristol. So that's groups of schools can apply for that. The second component is looking at best practice. And I've heard a lot of people talking about best practice today and good practice within the city. And that component too is very much giving an opportunity for schools to scale that up to a wider group of schools in the city and bring that learning to more children and young people across the city. And then the third component is looking at, it's almost like an incubation fund. So small pots of funding where schools can test and try new ideas with the aim that if those are successful, they can be moved into component 2 and be scaled up to a wider group of schools going forward. So we've had 2 rounds of funding so far. The first round closed at the end of the last academic year, so we only gave a very short turnaround on that. And the second one closed at the end of September. We were due to have a 3rd round of funding to close at the end of December, decided to pause that just to review some of the applications we had in the previous rounds and see if we could take some of the ones that we rejected forward with a little bit of work. We also agreed at the last forum that we could develop some oven ready programs to take out to schools, and one of those we're currently looking at, which is early language development in reception and early key stage 1, specifically in the south of the city where a number of schools came to us with an ask for funding around that area, and that's something we're currently working on. So basically what I would like to do is with the forum's approval is to launch a 3rd round of the grant funding to open this month and close in at the end of March, with delivery dates starting in the next academic year, so that they have a whole academic year to implement some of the changes and put that kind of forward planning into place. But that would mean rolling the remainder of that, I think it's around £650,000 into the next academic year to deliver that programme in academic year 23-24. And obviously that would mean that the project manager role, which supports that 50% of the time, would need to continue for that academic year. And also the other recommendation is looking at, we've been approached by a number of voluntary and community sector organisations who work very closely with schools around interventions in the classroom and with schools. And a number of them have asked whether they could apply for funding instead of schools, so they could do the legwork in terms of going out recruiting the schools and managing that funding for a period of that academic year. So just asking for approval or questions or comments around those recommendations. And if anyone has any questions about the programme so far and some of the organisations or some of the schools we've funded to date, then happy to answer those.
Okay, thank you very much, Tommy. It's helpful to see how part of that funding is being utilised. I've got a few questions and I'll open up a bit more wider, but of the grants that have been applied for now and that we've approved, when do we anticipate seeing any output from those? How will we know if they've been successful or not?
So as part of the application process, the schools were asked to outline milestones along that journey, that kind of implementation journey, and they're reviewed at points along that process that will unlock specific points of the funding. So I've outlined there. So I've just reviewed the first 2 grants that were funded in round 1, and that included a monitoring visit and an evaluation form just to capture where they are in that implementation process. And I've noticed that people talking about the challenges around recruitment and retention in teacher workforce at the moment, and that has been a bit of a barrier to some of that implementation phase. We expect to see those interventions starting to go into that kind of delivery phase now from that first implementation phase from the round 1 funding. So over the next 3 to 4 months, we should start to see that interventions start to be embedded within the school, and hopefully seeing through kind of surveys for young people and staff what the impact of that is going to be for those young people.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. I think because some of those grants are very small for small provisions, I guess it's, you know, if we're releasing the other 650 and doing them in sort of 3 or 4, 5K chunks, that's going to be an awful lot of projects to then review, to know if they've been successful, to then think if they'll be part of the bigger plan for implementation. I'm just conscious of the work that's involved. And you talked about Oven Ready programs, which I imagine would then meet the needs of a wider group of pupils rather than a standalone primary, for example. So it's just sort of understanding that if we were to release the rest of it, is there a cutoff on value? Because otherwise we could end up with a considerable number.
Yeah, so the majority of the work will be in components 1 and 2, which is looking at those bigger pieces of work. I don't expect to see too many of those smaller parts, and I've kept them quite light touch in terms of the application process for schools, and the evaluation process isn't as rigorous as component 1 and component 2, which have a much higher value in terms of financially. The component 3 is very much looking at things like CPD for school staff. So some of that is so something that came up quite a lot was a demand for MELSA training, mediated learning support assistant training, which is delivered by our educational psychology team. And that gave us a bit of an understanding where the kind of need is in the sector. So we were able to develop an Oven Ready program that we've now offered out directly to schools, which is the MELSA program. So we've offered out 2 cohorts of 20 LSAs to take training over this academic year and next. So that's 40 LSAs will be trained across the city, as well as 1 whole school approach. So that, I think that smaller grant process gives us a kind of understanding of where the need is in the system and allows us to focus on those Oven Ready pieces of work.
Okay, thank you. And then just on the final point about the voluntary sector, I think from my perspective, we want to have a really robust quality assurance processes of vetting in relation to if we were to offer it out to other providers, to make sure that they, you know, we were confident around how they were going to engage with schools, and then we're able to evidence robust impact in terms of what they seek to achieve from it.
Yeah.
Simon. I think you're on mute, Simon.
Yeah, page 46, 5.2, you got early language development and reception and key stage 1 as a consistent theme. Are maintained nursery school eligible in this?
Nursery
because of course,
are.
you know, early language doesn't actually start in reception.
Yeah. And so nursery schools aren't in scope for the funding, but I'm working with my colleagues in early years to develop that program and the Education Endowment Foundation. So that piece of work is already being developed by our early years colleagues around early language development, and we're hoping that we can extend that into reception and key stage 1, and early key stage 1. So I am working with colleagues from our early years team to develop that program.
Yeah, just to sort of highlight, Simon, that there is the Bristol early language work going on that is funded jointly through Education and Public Health that Nikki Theobald is running, And then there's also the funding that was de-delegated to early years from the underspend to use for supporting children with SEND. And again, the early language is part of that. So that connection through to Tommy, or whilst it's a different funding pot, obviously what we need to do is make sure that the two pieces of work connect up.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Comments? No. Okay. So we are being asked to approve the rollover of the 650k to next academic year, continue to fund the programme manager role, and approve the widening of the criteria to include voluntary and community sector. So I think with the other points that I mentioned earlier about the measurement of being able to manage those smaller grants, really being stringent with measuring outcomes and then how we actually implement them, then I think I would be happy to propose that we accept those requirements. But has anyone got any objections? Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Tommy. Much appreciated. Okay, well, that brings us then to the close of our meeting. Is there any other business from anybody? No? Great. Well, it's 1 minute to 7. There we are. So we have finished on time. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a very good evening and speak to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.